Well, Sully's ready and I'm ready, and I'm not sure where Scout is, but she may join us later. So we're going to just go ahead. Today, we're going to talk about the Industrial Revolution in transportation and maybe a little bit about communications as well. Um, Let me share my screen here with my mad skills. There we go. Okay, so we already talked a little bit about the fact that the steam engine was invented in 1769. There's Scout. Well, hello. You're late. James Watt invented or improved on the steam engine, and this one was a smaller, more compact edition of the steam engine that could be adapted for either to be used in factories or to be used in transportation. In 1776, the submarine was invented. This was invented in America by a man named David Bushnell, or Bushnell, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It was called the Turtle, and it was a one-man submarine. He would have to paddle it with his feet and then steer it with his hands. It was to be used as a weapon during the American Revolution, and it was supposed to be able to go right up to ships underneath the water to British ships and plant an explosive on them and then move away so that the ship would blow up. It was never actually successful at this. And eventually, the ship that had to take it close to the British ships was sunk and it was lost. So it's the first successful submarine. The guy did manage to get into it and paddle around and go where he wanted to and come back, but it was never successful as a weapon at this point. In 1791, a man named John Barber in Scotland invented the bicycle. Now, as you can see, this bicycle doesn't look a whole lot like what we're used to. It doesn't have the same kind of handlebars. I'm betting it doesn't have a whole lot of a brake, but I couldn't find a really great description of this. But he built this to enable workers to be able to get from their homes to their jobs in the factories faster, so they didn't have to get up as early. Apparently, he liked to sleep in a little bit, and I can't blame him for that. And he wanted the workers to be able to sleep in a little and still be able to get to work on time without having to get up and walk for so long. In 1802, the first successful locomotive was built. This ran on steam, and it was built in Great Britain by a man named Richard, Trevithick. I'm not sure about that. Trevithick, that's a name. And this is what it looks like. You can see it doesn't look a whole lot like what we're used to seeing locomotives look like, but it's a beginning. In 1807, Robert Fulton began the first successful steamboat operation with his boat, the Clermont. And he didn't actually invent the steamboat. There had been other steamboats before, but this is the first one that's reliable and successful. And you can use it, and it goes upstream, it goes downstream, it doesn't matter about the current. The ships no longer had to depend on wind power, and it was much more efficient, much quicker. In 1812, the first railroad was built. This was in Great Britain. It was the Great Middleton Railroad in Great Britain. And the first steam locomotive had a name. It was the Salamanca. And this was the first commercially successful locomotive. And you can see it's starting to look a little bit more like what we're used to. Still not quite there yet. In 1825, a canal, the Erie Canal, was dug between the Great Lakes and New York. And this, you can see, here's the Great Lakes, and this is where the canal runs right there. This was around a 15-mile canal, and it provided access from the Great Lakes through this canal to New York and then onto the Atlantic Ocean, so that you could have shipping and trade. And it allowed a lot more easy trade between Canada and the US, because a lot of the Great Lakes border Canada and the US both. In 1844, the telegraph was invented. This was invented by Samuel Morse, And he also invented the Morse code so that you could talk on it, and it allowed communication over distances. Now, this was not wireless communication like what we're used to now. It had wires that had to be strung up, and if the wires were broken or pulled down or damaged in any way, the communication didn't go through. It was not, you didn't pick up and talk, and they were hearing your voice on the other end. They used this telegraph key and tapped out messages using Morse code. In 1844, Charles Goodyear patented the process called, it was known as vulcanizing rubber, which means you heated it up and added sulfur to it, which made it much stronger. This made it possible to create tires like what we still use today. In fact, there's still a Goodyear brand of tires that's available today. In 1853, Elisha Otis invented the safety brake for elevators, making them practical and safe. This invention allowed for the development of much more tall buildings and skyscrapers. This meant that when the elevator got to a certain floor, it stopped and stayed there. You didn't have to have people down on the bottom holding it with pulleys and making sure it didn't fall down. It just and they still use a variation of the Otis safety brake today. In 1856, the Bessemer process was invented by Henry Bessemer, which allowed for making steel. Before that, we had mostly used iron for everything. Steel is stronger because it's an alloy of more metals. The iron was heated up and then blasted with air, and that removed all of the impurities from it and made it a much more hardened, stronger product. This allowed for the beginning of mass production of inexpensive steel. In 1858, the internal combustion engine was invented by a man named Jean Lenoir in France. This paved the way for a lot of other inventions. This is the first engine that runs on gasoline. In 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed. It ran from Council Bluffs, Iowa to San Francisco, California, and it was the first railroad line to completely go all the way across the continent of North America, well, of the United States, and it connected the East to the West. In 1876, the telephone was invented by Alexander Graham Bell. It allowed communication from person to person over a distance. Now, this was, you could hear the person's actual voice talking in your ear. In 1877, the Great Railroad Strike happened. Railroad owners cut wages and violence erupted. Federal troops were used to end this strike. In 1879, the incandescent light bulb was invented by Thomas Edison, and it allowed factories to remain open after dark. So this is the beginning of a cycle that, things could work 24 hours a day now. In 1885, the automobile was invented by a man named Carl Benz in Germany. This was the first practical automobile that used the internal combustion engine. It was very expensive and only wealthy people could purchase it. And each one of them was kind of an individual, almost a work of art. The pieces were handmade, they were put together. So you can see why this is going to be very expensive, and there's not that many of them. Also in 1885, the motorcycle was invented by Gottlieb Daimler. It was also powered by the industrial internal combustion engine. You can see it doesn't look anything like what we're used to seeing, as well as the automobile in the previous picture, but it's the beginnings. This is where we're heading. In 1900, Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, who was a German, invented an airship that was filled with helium. It was called the Zeppelin. And it was able to travel long distances, and it even was able eventually to travel across the Atlantic Ocean and carry passengers. So this was the first air travel for passengers, was the Zeppelin. In 1903, brothers Orville and Wilbur Wright made the first successful airplane flight. It took place in Kitty Hawk in North Carolina. That's not where they lived originally, where they actually invented it. They carried this airplane to Kitty Hawk because it had long spans of beach and sand, and they figured if they were going to crash, it was going to be better to crash in sand. And so that's why the first flight was made at Kitty Hawk. In 1908, Henry Ford began production of the Model T Ford. Now, Henry Ford lived in America, and he created the assembly line method of production, where like there was a mechanized line that moved, and the automobile was on this line, and it moved to a group of workers, and that group of workers put the doors on, moved to the next group of workers, and that group of workers put the tires on, or however they, whatever order they did it, so that each group of workers did one job, and this automobile just kind of traveled along, and when it got to the end of the assembly line, it was a completed automobile, and all of the parts were the same on every automobile. This was the beginning of affordable automobiles. And so regular type people, middle class type people, were now able to begin buying automobiles. The Model T was the first affordable automobile. And that was considered the end of the Industrial Revolution in transportation. Like we've said in the other videos, things continued, but they were kind of just improvements. I lost my words there for a minute. Improvements on the inventions that had already been done. That's really all I have for you on this subject. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them for me. I guess that's all I have for you. I'll see you the next time. Scout says bye. You can see she's very interested in saying goodbye now because she's ready for her nap. Sully, I guess that's it. See you next time.